line-scented air fresheners to turbochargers, there's PIE's data, or should be PIE's data, that is relevant to every one of those items. Having said that, those items that are vehicle application specific have another set of content called ACES, the Aftermarket Catalog Exchange Standard. So this is how we communicate the complex hierarchical information about what vehicle does this part fit. You know, there are 650 water pumps in the AirTex catalog, and only one of them fits my Chrysler. So I've got to go through the year and the make and the model and sometimes the engine and sometimes other optional equipment to narrow down the universe to just the one that fits my application. Now, given the nature of your product, much of it is not vehicle year, make, model driven in its lookup, and much of it is attribute driven. So your customer is selecting the product. The vehicle may start with Ford, but after that I'm looking for the 6-foot running boards, I'm looking for the diamond plated running boards. You know, by product attribute I'm narrowing it down. Think about tool and equipment. You know, if the customer's looking at a website and he's browsing for a ball peen hammer, there's no mention of any vehicle information in that. I'm looking for product type hammer, subtype ball peen, weight, 8 ounce, handle, fiberglass, there it is. Okay, so that's the difference and the overlap between ACES and PIE's data sets. So I'm going to devote most of my talk about product information, PIE's, but if there are questions about ACES, we can certainly get into that as well. So in this chapter, I want to just do a high-level survey of the components of the standards. These things were not all rolled out at one time. They evolved over years as the industry adopted one and there became sufficient take-up. Then we, the committee, the standards people, came to understand that there was an additional need. You know, the brand table is an example of that. For a long, long time, there were PIE's files with just a text string for the brand. And then the idea won support that, well, that should be a coded value. That should be a standardized coded value. And so a brand table emerged. The idea of product attributes that I've been speaking about, they were not coded and standardized originally. It's just a free-form text field. You could put any kind of attributes in there that you wanted. But then the resellers started saying, I've got 2 different suppliers of this product and they're talking about the attributes in 2 completely different ways. I cannot render this on a screen in a meaningful way, or I'm spending inordinate resources trying to normalize it into one. So I tell you what, if you're a maker of belts or hose or whatever the product category is, thou shalt say these 6 things about your product and you shalt say them in this fashion. And that brings order to the product attribute chaos that's out there. This is my objective in this chapter, is to kind of show you where everything is. It's all at the AutoCare website. It's all in the technology section. When you go to AutoCare, up in their navigation, they've got a what we do, and under what they do, there's a technology link. The Learning Lab is the page where all of the documentation and technical resources are. Nearly everything I'm talking about is freely available. It's public domain. You don't have to be a member to get it. You don't have to register or log in to get it. You can pull down and refer to all of this documentation at no cost without limitation. There are only two exceptions to that. One is the vehicle reference database. That's called the VCD B, the Vehicle Configuration Database. That's part of the ACES standard. There's a huge effort and commitment in maintaining that data set, updating it through different sources like Motor and IHS Polk and others. So that's a subscription product. If you need to publish a catalog and refer to vehicles by their year, make, model, engine combination, and the associated ID numbers, that's a $2,500 annual cost. A little over $200 a month to get the updates, to get the new versions of the database. The product attribute database is the only other item that has a fee associated with it, and I think that's still $500. Maybe they recently updated it. And that gets you the monthly updates. That's a library of those performance and physical attributes. So due to industry petitions and due to continuing ongoing research by contractors to the association, the PADB just gets bigger and bigger and bigger over time. So to ensure that you have access to all of the coded, standardized product attributes, you want to put down $500 and subscribe to it. And that's an unlimited number of users. So if 20 people at headquarters want to have it, it's $500. So the Learning Lab is where you access all the documentation. And what's in there are several things that you may not have commonly had occasion to come across. On the ACES side, there are some on-demand training videos available. There's a directory of service providers. Ryan, I think it was you and you were talking about the VCD B, or the product nomenclature codes, and you've got some outside contractors or resources that help in working with that. The association maintains a directory of outside third-party service providers. There's about 30 companies listed in there. Now, I will say most of them have their expertise in the traditional parts replacement market, but I think it's pretty easily transferable skill set. They're all motorheads to one degree or another. But they provide services from data mapping, data cleanup and standardization, publishing in different forms and formats, because NAPA today still requires your catalog content in a form different than most everybody else. So these companies have tools and software and services to help in that area. So that's a useful directory. The association's position on that is we don't favor or endorse anyone found in the directory. It's like the yellow pages. So it's there as a resource, an industry resource. And some of the companies in there aren't even members of the association. They're identified as being out there and providing credible services related to either ACES or PIES or both. The brand code table is, again, one of those resources that there is no cost associated with. I want to be sure we're familiar with how to navigate that and how to petition for changes, because it is your database and you can ask that new brands be added, or you can correct information that's in there. Just a few years ago, we added a library of how-to white papers related to PIES. Folks, the feedback we got was this product information specification is all-encompassing. I mean, it's the super set of product information. It incorporates segments or chapters that talk about everything from interchange to the digital assets to the pricing and on and on and on, the description segment. How can I eat this whole elephant at once? Well, you can't. So we authored a series of white papers that may be useful to you if you haven't found them or referred to them and you're working with pies. There's a white paper on how to make the best use of the description segment. There's one on the digital asset segment. There's one on the product attribute segment. And it explores technically what data elements make up that segment, and there's some narrative in there about how to use it, some best practice do's and don'ts. So we're very proud of those white papers, and that's a valuable resource. I don't think this affects you. You guys are pretty capable in reading these files, but we did hear many manufacturers lament the fact that they couldn't get their content converted from Excel, where most of them manage it, into XML, which is the communication format prescribed by pies. So we produced a little video that walked them through using a parser and using the software to do that. And then some pies on-demand training videos. So these are all linked and available through that resource library. As David said, the brand code table is not new to you. You're familiar with it. Why they're used, where they're used, what are the elements, where do you go? So the codes that are used in the brand code table, it's a 4-character alpha consonants only code. Why consonants only? Because we didn't want to mistakenly spell words with the codes. Some words might not be nice words, so we left the vowels out. So that's why BBBB is the first possible brand code. So there's something you can share with your friends over, at the next cocktail party. Why is the brand code all consonants? We understand it competes with, and everybody's got other brand codes that they use, but this is the industry standard reference code. This is reference data. And I use that term because that's true of much of this. The vehicle database is reference data. It's not the only way of describing a vehicle, but it's a way of referring to it that 1,000 other companies in your industry have agreed to support. So it's kind of universally understood. So is BBBB. Everyone knows that's 3M, the first possible brand name in the table. Brands are used certainly in the product information exchange file. So if you're sending me a file, it's important that I know what brand is the subject of all this product information. If you're sending me an ASUS catalog application and you've said, for this year, make, model, engine of vehicle, this is the part number of the water pump that fits, well, brand code. Whose water pump is it? And there could be multiple brands in a particular file. So it's pretty essential for either one of the standard sets. And you guys are making good use of it. There's documentation on the brand code website about how to use it. You've petitioned for new brands. It is a hierarchy. It starts with the parent company, and then the brand owner, the brand, and then the sub-brand. Just a quick word about those elements. Obviously, the key is the brand code. Everything revolves around the brand. Some brands, like K&N, for example, have several series of products or grades of product that they market. K&N is the dominant brand name on the packaging, so that is the brand. But what was the one we were looking at this morning, David? The black one?
71 series, the Black Hawk.
So they might call it the Black Hawk, might be the sub-brand. If I'm a receiver of product, it may be helpful to me in performing my category management to be able to parse out sub-brands. So if that is included in my PIES data feed, then I can manage my K&N product line at a more granular level. Now, one or more brands may be owned by a brand owner. So Federal Mogul Motorsports owns Champion and Anco and Wagner Lighting and Moog and other brands, and is a division of the parent company, Federal Mogul Corporation. So those two fields, parent company and brand owner, are just ways of putting that brand in context. I don't believe there's a use case for either of those in the standards, but they can be referred to in the PIES file simply to say, all right, I've given you the code for Champion, and I'm not talking about Champion starters or Champion helmets, I'm talking about Champion spark plugs. So the brand owner is Federal Mogul Motorsports. Puts it in context. All of that's explained in the instructions, and because of the way it flows from the parent company down, if you were to initiate a completely new petition for a brand new company, the first thing you have to enter into the database is the parent company. And then a parent has brand owner, one or more brand owners. That's the second element you put in. And then the brand owners have brands associated with them. So that's the sequence in which you enter that stuff.
What if you wanted to combine parent companies?
Combining
How would we go about doing
parent
that?
companies. Is that an option available to us?
What I'm talking about, so we have like truck stuff, branded, and someone else made truck stuff for us, so it's under a completely different parent brand code. Whereas branded products and Promotive are under our actual brand code. Whereas truck stuff was actually created by DCI, and but it's under. They just made a generic name for it, and it's under AAM, so it's not under our main one.
Given the complex interpretive nature of that,
Yeah.
I'd be picking up the phone and calling the association, and there's someone tasked with administering the table.
We can get all to Jonathan on that when they're helps.
There you go, Jonathan Larson. Yep. Perfect. And I did notice, I did a search on AAM, and you do have two different parents.
One of the ones I was talking about. So.
Exactly, okay. Any other questions about the brand table? If not, as I said, ACES is the lesser of the two standards from your perspective, but I do want to just touch on a couple of elements of it. On the association website, you find a license agreement to this vehicle's database. Do you all subscribe to that? You do make use of it? Okay. The data delivery spec documentation is all in there, including a field-by-field definition of what is meant by body style, what is meant by drive wheels. We tried to really go to lengths to explain field by field what is in the different data sets. On the last Friday of every month, except when it's a holiday month, then they will move forward the publication dates. New versions of the database are released. They include a complete refresh of the data set. So the next one that'll come out next Friday will be the October version of the VCD B. There will be a corresponding publication of the PADB, the Product Attribute Database. Something that's new, you've probably noticed this year, is the net change file, or the net change log. For a long, long time, the way changes from one version to the next were communicated was very cryptic and not very useful at all. And people had to develop technology to compare one to the next to see what in the world changed. You know, a new vehicle being released, and that's where most of the effort goes, is right now a lot of focus on getting the 2017s into the database, because until they're in there and until they can be referenced through a catalog file, then the parts information can't get down to the counter. So lots of pressure to get new vehicles added to that database in a timely fashion. a new change log was created that tells you what the type of change was. Is this an add to the database? Is this a delete to the database? Or is this a change of an existing value? That's helpful. What table of values is affected by this change? Is it the engine? Is it the transmission? Is it the body style? And what was the old value? What's the new value? And what's the reference ID? So that gives you kind of a human readable table that you can use to filter down and say, well, I'm particularly interested right now in new adds to the base vehicle table. I'm not worried about transmissions or body styles or other things. Tell me what new vehicles were added in this version. And through bringing this into a database or Excel, you can quickly filter it down and get more useful interpretation of the latest version. There's one other change that they made that I want to make you aware of, and that was ID retention was the way that was called. It used to be that if the spelling of Le Mans was found to be in error, and we had to correct the spelling, the old Le Mans got deleted and the new Le Mans got published with a new model ID. Tim's shaking his head because you can imagine how disruptive this is to data maps that people have worked so hard on. All you did was correct the spelling on it. And it happened all the time with correcting the engine displacement from 301 to 305. It's the same darn engine. The VIN didn't change. Nothing else changed. So it was a limitation. It was a constraint of the technology that was supporting the database, and they finally fixed it so that they can make minor changes and keep the ID number, because the ID number is what Federal Mogul has used to say this part fits that vehicle with that engine ID. And if the standard goes and changes the engine ID, Federal Mogul's got to go back and remap everything and then get the new updated content down to their supply chain partners, and it's very disruptive. So ID retention was introduced in 2016, and so was this change log. So those are significant enhancements, I think, to the vehicle config database.
How much was that for the VCD B?
What?
For the retention, the ID retention, do you remember?
Ryan, you seem to be on speaking terms with Jonathan. Who gets the release notes? That's the email notification that.
I probably get them.
Yeah. I think it was in the spring. I can't say exactly, but at the May meeting, I believe they were celebrating the fact that that had gone into effect. For a long time, there were a large number of changes that had been embargoed. They were submitted, petitioned, found to be valid changes, but they set them aside because they said, we just don't want to implement these changes and cause all this impact until we can retain the ID numbers. And maybe they're still working their way through that backlog, but I believe ID retention is in effect and has been since the spring. Jonathan Larson, just so you know, is the staff resource. His title includes data quality assurance, something of that sort. So he's the guy kind of administering these data sets and many of the standards work groups.
How many people work for the Auto Care Association?
40-some, mid-40s. Once I left there, Taylor, who you'll meet, started staffing up the technology standards department. She's got 6 or 8 people in there now. And that's an interesting story because you will bear witness to this. In the time I was there, this moved over the 17 years from a volunteer-supported effort. The original make, model, engine table was donated by an enthusiastic member. And then we decided to invest resources in it and make it more professionally managed. And eventually it fell into the hands of Motor Information Services. This is a Hearst business media company. Motor publishes technical information, wiring diagrams, all kinds of stuff, and is a function of that, they do vehicle research natively as a natural part of their business. So they're in there figuring out what the new Chevys and Fords and Audis are going to be, because they need to reference that in the wiring diagrams and technical information. So they were a natural partner to administer that portion of the standard. They inherited this website, this enhanced standard interface, where you go to download the tables and view the databases. They inherited that from the original volunteer-led effort, and it was a little kludgy and suboptimal. So Taylor has been leading an effort at the association to rebuild the entire database and house it at the association. Motor, along with IHS, Polk, and other companies, will continue to contribute their research, and these files will get uploaded into the vehicle database. But the responsibility for managing and housing and presenting the interface to you and other users will be solely with the trade association. They concluded, and rightly so, I believe, this was too critical an asset of the industry to leave with any member, regardless of how trusted and valued they were. You know, you don't know what Hearst Business Media may decide to do tomorrow. They may look at this little nuisance activity they have of administering a vehicle database and say, why are we doing that? Shut it down. So by early 2017, the association will have it in-house with additional staff and resources to administer it. And they're assuring us that that'll be a fairly smooth and seamless transition. And all of us in technology know that we wish them the best. Shifting over to PI's documentation. Again, on that resource library, you'll find all of the things listed here, the XML, the field definitions. The PI's documentation changed rather dramatically in the version 6.7, the way they listed all the supporting IDs. They used to be on a...
Yeah, they put them in the Excel spreadsheet rather than the PDF.
That's exactly right. But other than that, this is a standard that will continue to evolve. I was speaking with David and said, you know, the answers to a couple of the questions you all submitted, I checked with a couple of the industry volunteers, committee members who were on that PI's work group, and they say, you know what, that which you asked is addressed in the is to be addressed in the next version of PI's. And one of the other questions that was asked about related items, I think. How do you communicate products that are appropriate to be sold with another item, suggested related items? That should be an enhancement to the interchange segment, it was suggested. Great idea. So you might find support for related items in a future version of PI's, and you can thank yourselves for it. This is how these things work. They are, you know, the product of industry input. I was explaining to Ryan, you know, there's those 40-some people sitting in Bethesda, Maryland, are not sitting around going, what brands are missing from the brand table? I wonder what parts we don't have in the part classification table. You know, they're association people. They're experts in IT or experts in accounting or marketing or lobbying, but they're not, for the most part, parts people. So that's why they depend on you. They depend on the industry to petition and request these changes and new additions to the standard. So in the, where was I going with that? It was a great story until I lost it. Digital assets. There's a separate document on the digital assets best practices. Digital assets are everything from PDF documents of all kinds of types to video, audio, file assets, product images. And I walked away from that exercise with a whole new appreciation for how complex a simple little thing like an image could be. What view am I looking at? Is this the top, the bottom, the side, or an angle? What is the background color? Because you have to assume a machine is reading this information and acting on it. What is the resolution? What is the size of the image? What is the technical format of the image? Is it a TIFF and a JPEG or a RAW? All this metadata about the image needs to be communicated so that machines and software and processes can act on it. So what seemed like a simple exercise in defining a best practice, it started to include all of this stuff. If the asset is a PDF, what is it? Is it a brochure? Is it installation instructions? Is it warranty information? Because as a receiver of that content, I may do different things based on what you tell me it is. I put all my warranty information over here. I put installation instructions in a separate web page or location. So the metadata that gives additional context to the digital assets is very important. There are these white papers I was referring to for pies. Using pies for pricing, using pies for product attributes, using pies for rich content and market copy, images, kits. So that kind of takes that big elephant called pies, breaks it down into manageable sections. So you might be very interested in the digital assets. The best practice, you probably already have it committed to memory, I'm sure. I've talked a bit about the product attribute database. I mentioned this as one of the 2 items that you pay for, and you all are subscribers to this. The documentation on the website includes the ER diagram, the database diagram. This again is something that is constantly being added to, largely based on petitions from industry. I think it's important to understand the process for how this was originally compiled. Product attributes, as I said, are those important facts about a product that a customer finds useful in selecting between 2 or more of the same product for their need. Think of your own experience. You go to Best Buy or any other retail store. Where were you? Tiger Direct? My gosh. You got 1,400 television sets or monitors there, and I want to compare 3 of them. So I select the 3 and I hit the comparator and down drop all of the product attributes. Everything from how many HDMI connectors it has and so on and so forth. Well, it's that same thing for auto parts. And the relevant attributes about a disc brake pad are different than those about a timing set, and different still from those about a spark plug. So product type by product type, the association gathered 2 or more makers of that product and 1 or more reseller. O'Reilly Auto Parts, I got to tell you, as a company, as an organization, is just head and shoulders above most others in their willingness to volunteer and contribute to this sort of effort. They, I don't know if that has any business impact to you or not, but if you really want to find some enlightened folks, you'll find them in the data services department at O'Reilly Auto Parts, because they invested literally hundreds of hours vetting the attributes that were submitted by the manufacturers. And a manufacturer would say, I make brake pads. Here's what I think is important about my brake pads. And O'Reilly would say, well, I represent the interests of the customers. So here's what the customer thinks is important to know about your brake pad. And you kind of get agreement on the core attributes, and that's what went into the standard. In some cases, it merely defines a field that the supplier populates with the relevant data. So thickness of the pad or of a rotor. The association can't prescribe all the possible thicknesses, but it does say expressed to 2 decimal places, in inches or centimeters. In some cases, they do prescribe a normalized list of values. So if it's a rotor, surface type, drilled or slotted or whatever the choices are for that. I'm reaching the limit of my automotive expertise. But if there is a finite number of choices for a particular value, the standard does try to include those in the documentation so that you're not filling it in with some arbitrary rotor type that doesn't exist. Okay? That PADB is updated monthly, and if you've got product types that you feel are underrepresented in there, I'm sure Jonathan would love to engage with you and get that through the proper channels and into the database so that your suppliers can reference the ID numbers in the data content they send to you. It's all about helping your suppliers help you. Here's one you may not have heard about because I think it doesn't get talked about enough. There's a service that was rolled out in about 2013 or 14 called Aftermarket Match. And it is one of the few examples of true collaboration between the Auto Care Association and their friends in Research Triangle at AASA. AASA, the Automotive Aftermarket Suppliers Association, they represent, as the name suggests, aftermarket suppliers. Auto Care Association represents most of those same suppliers and their channel partners, retailers, wholesale distributors, performance accessory WDs, and so forth, the whole supply chain. So when these two organizations get together and agree to work on something, you can be pretty much assured it has value across the entire industry. Aftermarket Match was a service that they spun up in answer to the question, you would love to know what the standards capabilities of your suppliers are. Supplier by supplier. Do they support PIEs? If so, what version? If so, what data elements within PIEs? Do they support ACES? This is important information for you to know about your supplier community. The suppliers would also like to know what are the data requirements of my customers, of my trading partners. Does the AAM group support PIEs version 6.7, or are they still on 6.6? And by having visibility to that, trading partners can make the most strategic investments in the standards. That was the proposition behind Aftermarket Match. Tenneco said, as Joe, as the voice of Tenneco, said, in making decisions about supporting the standards, we need to know where we'll get the biggest bang for the buck.